Let's talk about virtues. Has anyone called you friendly or honest or considerate or generous? Well, these are all examples of virtues. Having an example of something doesn't mean that you know what is the definition of that thing. If someone says you possess a virtue, then what they're saying is that you have a habit of behaving in a way that displays high ethical standards. Now, that is a really ambiguous definition. What are the ethical standards? What does it mean to display ethical standards? And what exactly is a habit? Like, how many times do you have to lie until no one can call you truthful anymore? Truthfulness is a virtue. Depending on who you ask, you might get a different set of examples of what the virtues are. And depending on who you ask, you might also get a different focus on which virtues are the important ones. But most people agree that virtue is something like an excellence in your character, a way that you're supposed to be. So, yes, lots of things or animals could be described as having a virtue, but when we're talking about human beings, we're speaking about their human character. If the character is good, call that a virtue. If the character is bad, then call that a vice. So the contrary description of your character trait, if not virtuous, is that it is a vice. Now, here are a few different camps that you might fall into. Like if you're a Buddhist, for example, you would be familiar with the Eightfold Path. In Buddhism, there are the Four Noble Truths, and the fourth noble truth is that there is a path to living a good life. And the Eightfold Path is basically a list of 8 virtues, like right mindfulness and right this and right that. Well, the Eightfold Path in Buddhism is just a way of understanding how to be a virtuous person. But you might be a philosopher and you might love Aristotle. You might be an Aristotelian, in which case you would have heard not of the Eightfold Path, but of the golden mean. In Aristotelianism, there's this idea of the golden mean. It's that you have a way of being that falls in that perfect equilibrium, that perfect balance and harmony between one vice and another vice. So here is Aristotle's doctrine of the mean. Basically, we've got how your spirit manifests itself. If you have a deficiency in some virtue like courage, then you would be a coward. You have not enough courage. These are all vices and they are all deficiencies. But if you take those virtues and then you have too much rather than too little, the excess amount of virtue is also a vice. So in the middle, that golden mean, that harmony, balance, perfect place to be is to be courageous. If you have too much courage, you're rash. If you have not enough courage, you are a coward. Freedom. If you have too much freedom, that's bad. It's called anarchy. And if you have not enough freedom, then that's bad. It's called slavery. So Aristotle gives us this idea of what virtues are. They're the character traits that are the perfect middle balance between too much of something and too little of something when it comes to your character, when it comes to your habits, when it comes to your dispositions and the way you act. Now, that one is slightly different than what Plato said. Plato, also a philosopher, said basically that a human being has 3 parts to their soul. And here, think of soul as like your life, your personality, your being, your essence. When you say, I am hungry, who is hungry? What is hungry? I. Well, call that I, you, the soul. All of you, just call it the soul. He says, you've got 3 parts in your soul. You've got your mind or your intellect, you've got your spirit or your heart, and you've got your appetite, your desires. And Plato thinks that your 3-part soul, your intellect, spirit, and appetite, each has a way to do it well. And for the intellect, the virtue is wisdom. For the spirit, the virtue is courage. And for your appetite, the virtue is temperance. And when this three-part soul has each one of its parts manifesting its virtue, then the soul has its own virtue, and that's called justice. So for Plato, there's 4 main virtues that a human being can manifest. And so that's Plato. And then this golden mean idea, that's Aristotle. We've also already talked about Buddhism and the Eightfold Path. But if you're a Christian, then you're going to have the cardinal virtues, the heavenly virtues, the theological virtues. If you're a Confucianist, then you've got the 5 constant virtues, like Li being one of the most important ones. If you're a Stoic, then you've got the 4 types of virtue. So lots of different people in the history of intellectuality have discussed virtues. And we can think of virtues as good character or moral character, the right way to be. Aristotle puts it in this terms, and it's vague on purpose. A virtuous person will do the right thing at the right time, in the right way, for the right reason, in the right amount, toward the right person. Now, this doesn't tell you what is the right way or what is the right amount. And Aristotle thought that you could just be vague like this because the virtuous person will know how much of something to express. So like think of truthfulness. Well, yeah, maybe you did something really amazing, but if you're screaming it from the rooftops, then that's called boastfulness. That's too much honesty. And then if you're leaving things out, someone says like, hey, what have you been up to lately? And you don't even mention that amazing thing you did. Well, then you're lacking truthfulness, and that's bad too. So there's justice, which is something good, a virtue. And then there's too much, which is bad, a vice, and there's too little, which is bad, a vice. And so, again, that would be going back to Aristotle, but then we could also give the theory of Plato, and we can give the theory of Confucianism or Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius also has something interesting to say. He's a Stoic, and so let me add Marcus Aurelius in here. He says, and this is not a direct quote, for the rational social animal, and that's you're a human being, and that means that you are a social animal and that you are a rational animal. So he's talking about human beings. So let's just read that. For human beings, happiness and unhappiness, what's that? Your life going well or your life not going well. So for human beings, their life going well or their life not going well does not depend on what you feel. It does depend on what you do. So if you want to know if your life is going well, then look at your actions, look at your career, look at your nighttime routine. Do not look at the way you feel. Look at what you do to know if your life is going well. Similarly, if you want to know a person's vices and virtues, don't look at the way that they feel. Look at what they do. For Marcus Aurelius and for Stoics, virtue is a way to be, a way to do. It's an activity. It's something you actualize. It's a disposition. It's a habit. So if someone says that they're really, really honest, well, don't believe them. You have to see what they do. If what they do displays that they are honest, then that person possesses the virtue of honesty. And if you're thinking about your own life and you're thinking, okay, am I living a good life? Am I a good person? Is this the way to be? Don't look at your feelings, look at your actions. So basically, virtue amounts to your character, and virtue signals good character. On the contrary, vice signals bad character.